Hello everyone and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy Fanatics head-to-head episode where we put two players up against each other to see who will be picking between the two for our starting sides for 2025. This is episode 5 of the series. If you haven't checked out the first 4 episodes, make sure you do. We've already had some brilliant guests on. We had Warnie for the first episode. Then we had Mitch and Luke back-to-back in episodes 2 and 3 from the Ball Boys. And then we had my fellow co-host Jaiden Poposky on the 4th episode. But we will be having another very, very special guest on this episode, chatting about another 2 forwards, Jason Horne-Francis and Izak Rankine, another 2 of the F1 candidates that we'll be considering for our sides. But you'll know this man across Twitter as well as the Value King, and finished 3rd in 2021 in AFL Fantasy Classic, and also the new host of brand new podcast, Lemon Leagues. It is DT Lemon. Lemon, mate, how are you?
Hey, Bales. I'm good, thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. Always love chatting fantasy with you. And yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks. Just launched the Lemon League podcast, so doing some more regular podcasting this year. A bit of a strategy focus on that one. So it's going to be really great to chat with some really great coaches and sort of pick their brains on how we approach AFL fantasy strategy. So yeah, it's big off season, but yeah, looking forward to talking these 2 players today.
Yeah, exactly. And I might have accidentally put an S on the end of leagues. It's just Lemon Leagues, so apologies for that. But yeah,
It's just
we will
one of
be.
them, mate. You can't compare them to anyone else. It's just one of lemon leagues.
Yep, exactly right. So, but yeah, we will be chatting, as you said, about 2 of the forwards in Jason Horne-Francis and Izak Rankine. As I mentioned before, a lot of people looking at them as their F1, along with a host of other names as well, which is why I think it's so relevant, because I think F1 could go in a number of different directions. Do you pick an F1? Do you not? So we'll be chatting about these 2 players here. So looking at the first, obviously the 2. So Jason Horne-Francis, 919K, obviously got the mid forward status, 40.5% owned. So very, very popular at the moment. 89.5 average last year from his 21 games. And then Izak Rankine is exactly 100K cheaper at 819K, average to 79.8 from his 15 games, with a current ownership of 10.5%. So a little bit more unique, which is going to be made for a good discussion, along with the fact that one's Port, one's for Crows as well. And DTLM being the Port man, we'll take Jason Horne-Francis. As a Crows man, I'll be taking Izak Rankine, and we will be starting with a guest and going to go with Jason Horne-Francis to begin with. So, Lemon, mate, why should people be selecting Jason Horne-Francis in their fantasy side for 2025? Because a lot of people have already gone in that direction as well.
Yeah, he's very popular, mate, and you can sort of see why. End of last year, I think a lot of us had sort of written him off getting forward status, and then played a little bit more forward in the finals, I think, and just managed to gain that forward status. So, he's a guy that is a midfielder primarily. Played 54% CBAs last year, and I think the direction the club wants to take him is to be that sort of permanent midfielder. Maybe that will increase this year. So I think that's the first one. In terms of role, anytime we get these forward eligible players that are playing in the midfield, your ears start listening. And he's a young guy, so he's coming into his 4th year. He's still 21 years old, so expecting a bit of natural progression there. As his fitness builds, there is talk that maybe his fitness hasn't been maxed out in the last couple of years. He's had a few sort of interrupted off seasons. His first year was sort of a bit in and out for North Melbourne. So I think there's a lot to like. He's got the role, and he might even have a more improved role. There's, Willem Drew's injured at the moment, just going through some plantar fasciitis, I think. So potentially he starts the season with a bit of a better role, and potentially Port just want to get him in there. We know how good he is as a player. He's former number 1 pick. He's had great junior numbers. Played in the Sandful as a junior, dominated in the Sandful. I think we've seen pretty good football from him last year, but I'm backing that he's going to play some better football this year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that we always talk about natural progression as well as being that, I guess, dangerous thing that we're relying on. But I feel like with Jason Horne-Francis, it's not as much of an issue, because I think we all know that he's going to continue to improve, because that's just the player that he is. So I think we all see him as at least a 90 player, and he's obviously priced at 89. So I think we definitely all see that improvement. I'm just trying to get up his numbers here, but my computer is acting a little bit slow at the moment. He's obviously got that that scary floor. That's the one thing that slightly scares me here. And I'm trying to pull up the numbers here as my computer is slowly loading up the page where I can actually get his scores up here. So in terms of some of the low scores, like normally with premiums, like I don't know, a few of the players last year that have had high ceilings, like a Bontempelli and a Jordan Dawson went low, but like a Sarong never went under, I don't think he went under 80 or like 70. Like a lot of these guys were going over, whereas a guy like Horne-Francis, I've got numbers that says, so like there's some scores in here, like you got a couple in the 60s, you got a 49 there against Gold Coast, another 66 there, a 56 against the Crows in the showdown, a few other 70s there. And obviously, even the year before, obviously, is a bit different, but there's a few even a few more 40s in there as well. So, what do you want to sort of chat about in terms of his floor, Lemon? Because obviously, the Port man, you obviously watch him a lot closely as well. Is that an issue? Do you think with him starting up at that price as the second most expensive forward with this potential low floor that he potentially has?
It's definitely a concern. So I think we need to remember that last year he was 20 years old for the sort of first half of the season. So any young players, we're going to get a bit of variability in their scoring. You look at some of those matchups where he did score poorly, and they're sort of on the tougher matchups, maybe a bit more contested football, a bit less transition football. And for a young guy like that, the body hasn't matured completely. They've still got a bit of muscle to put on. Contested games isn't really his specialty, or that's definitely not how he pads his stats. He's the kind of guy that can pad a little bit on the outside, but he's not the kind of guy that's going to be getting 10 tackles a game. He's probably more on the mark side of things, building his score. So I think it is a bit of a concern, and I think probably the big reason coaches are getting scared off is because if you start him at F1 and he drops a poor score early, then all of a sudden everyone's going to be able to jump on him cheaper in a couple of rounds. But I guess the big tick for me is that early fixture. He does have some fairly juicy matchups. If anything, I think he's more likely to drop a higher score and get out of reach a little bit. So maybe he starts off with a bang, pulls out a few 110 plus scores. He's generally doesn't have the biggest ceiling, but I suspect we might see that improve this year. If anything, he could easily balance out those bad scores with a couple of big scores. And then maybe his price holds steady. So have you seen that early fixture, Buzz? It's pretty juicy.
Yes, yeah, I've just pulled up here, but I have obviously looked at it before over the last couple of weeks because he's been a guy I've been considering as my F1 as well. So looking at it here, like you got Collingwood, MCG, Richmond, Essendon, St Kilda, all four of those matchups are great. I know St Kilda are a little bit tougher last year, but with the injuries that they've got, I anticipate that being a matchup that I'd be wanting to target, especially for midfielders with a few injuries and the guys that have gone there. Hawthorn back and Sydney back to back isn't great, but Hawthorn is Adelaide Oval and Gatherround, Sydney SCG. There, but then you've got North Melbourne, Bulldogs, Adelaide, Geelong, Fremantle. So besides those two games back-to-back, Hawthorn, Sydney, I'm not concerned about any of those other matchups there. Maybe Showdown, we don't really see too many huge scores in the Showdown because they are very contested games, so maybe that's a bit low. Besides that, I think it's a really good run to start. And as you mentioned, he could get away from you and put up some of these big scores because I did mention the low floor as well, but we can't go and say that and then not include how like his high quality of scoring could be. So like he got a 111 against the Bombers in round 4. So obviously one of the matchups he's got early on. 113 against Geelong, and that was at GMHBA as well. 112 against Hawthorn. So tough matchup, still went really well, and that was at Adelaide Oval there. 112 against St Kilda. Obviously another early matchup for Port. 141 against Melton MCG. I think a lot of people remember that game, got a lot of those marks as well, had 13 marks there. So he's shown the ability he can get those marks and also lay some tackles. Like his tackle numbers were low, but he did have some games where he had 6 tackles, 7 tackles, 6 tackles. And if he's getting more time in the midfield, that's just going to increase anyway because he's going to be around the ball. People are going to get the ball and he's going to be able to tackle. So I think that those numbers can increase. And if he's got that midfield time, I think those numbers will elevate and there won't be as many of those floor scores. But do you think, obviously, with how well he played last year, do you think that is the tag potential issue as well? Because I think he's gone ahead of Rosie in terms of the pecking order. I think it's probably Butters, Horne-Francis, Rosie in terms of the order of tag threat. So would you agree with that? Do you think that's an issue, or do you think because how good Butters is that you reckon he'll just get it most of the time and Horne-Francis won't really have to worry about it too much?
Yeah, I think so, mate. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. So we know how good Zach Butters is, and particularly, he's the guy who's getting Brownlow votes, and I think that's the first name that comes up on the scouting report for Port, making sure that you stop Zach Butters. So I think he will get the first tag. I can see a world where Horne-Francis has a amazing first half of the year, and then maybe teams start to put a bit more attention into him, but with that midfield mix, you've got Rosie, who's a pretty good player as well. You've got Butters. You can't tag them all.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're going to have to go head to head with someone. I think Horne-Francis is that guy. Defensively, he hasn't really proven to be that strong. So I think he's probably more likely the guy where they put the attention on Butters, and then they'll put their best player on Horne-Francis, and they'll say, hey, if you want to go chase the ball, that's fine. But on the other end, we'll hurt you, and we'll make sure our best player gets off the leash. So I suspect that's what teams will do, but it could change throughout the year. If Zach Butters misses a game, that might be where he cops a bit more attention. But then again, he's the kind of guy that's tricky to tag because he can go forward, and he's a really tricky matchup. He can go sit deep forward, and I suspect Port will do that again, where he'll play out of the goal square, and he'll just really scare teams. If he does that once or twice, he's going to lose that tag because there's not many taggers that can really play full back. And he can score forward a little bit. He's not the best forward scorer, and you don't really want him there. But in a game where he does get tagged, I think that's enough to shake the tag, get back into the midfield, and put up a score. So the floor at the moment is a little bit scary, but I can't really see tags impacting that too much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he does remind me very much of that Patrick Dangerfield, Jordan De Goey, Christian Petrarca player, where they're that bigger midfielder. They can push forward. They can still kick goals. They're not like someone where you, even like a Sarong, where he was going forward at times last year, where you didn't like it. I still think if he was to spend a stint or two forward, it's not a big deal. Which obviously you just don't want those games where he does play a lot forward. Like his CBA numbers are pretty good last year, but there was a patch between rounds 21 and 24. So the last, obviously, few games of the season where he was under 50% in all those games. So like the 30, 33, 45, and 40. So you'd want those all over 50, which most of the games last year were. So whether that was just to ease him into the finals, I think that's probably what they were doing. But yeah, that's obviously something to watch. But yeah, and even in those games though, like even with the low CBAs, 141, 107, like a couple of good scores. There was a 71 and a couple of 80s in there. So obviously just sort of balance that out. But yeah, I think it's definitely something to watch. He's a very interesting player going into 2025, along with Izak Rankine, who is another player that we're going to be chatting obviously about now. So Izak Rankine, last year at times looked like he was going to break the competition apart. I remember Kingy before the Collingwood game at the MCG was saying how he reckons Rankine within the next month could be the number one player in the competition. And obviously as a Crows fan, that was getting me a bit excited to see what Rankine could do. And then, of course, that week that he says that, he does hamstring, unfortunately, against Collingwood in that famous one where he was done for, that wasn't running too far one, was it? No, hang on. No, sorry. Did the week, no, hang on. Yeah, he missed 4 weeks. Yeah, Collingwood. Yeah. He got injured again. Len, was that the one where he ran too far and did his hamstring?
My Crows fan friends were raving about that for weeks, so I couldn't pinpoint which week that was, but yeah.
Yes, it was. And people are probably wondering, how can you not remember that, Buzz? I can't remember because every time we're at the MCG playing Collingwood, I feel like we always get stitched up. I think it's, the year before was Dawson got hit in the face with like 5 seconds left. He would have been lining up for goals. So anyway, never mind my memory there. But yeah, so did his hamstring against Collingwood there and missed the following 4 weeks. Came back against obviously Sydney and then had the bye and then played round 16, round 17, was against Brisbane, got that suspension, was out for a fair while there. Came back against the Bulldogs in round 22 and then round 23 in the showdown. And then unfortunately, Dan Houston decided that's enough and had to knock him out. And then he missed the remainder of the season. So very, very stop-start year last year for Izak Rankine. But the positive was we did see him injected a lot more into the midfield. So even looking at 2023, in terms of CBA numbers, there were only 3 games in 2023 where he attended a CBA. And it was 13%, 10%, and 13%. So not even 2 or 3 CBAs a game in those. So not very many. But in terms of last year, every single game last year, he attended at least 10% CBAs. His lowest was 11% in round 2 against Geelong. Every other game was over 20%, which is a positive. In the games where he had over 30% CBAs, he averaged 87.8, and that was from the 8 games, which is very good. And that's also including the Sydney game where I believe he was managed, only 73% game time there. That was obviously his first game back from the hamstring injury. If you remove the games where he had 30% and just include the games where he had 40% or more CBAs, that average jumps up slightly to 93.6. Only a 5-game sample size, but we're still seeing that there is that upside potential of over 10 points. So, and one of those games was that game against Sydney where he got managed back in. But some good scores of 106, a 62 against the Essendon Adelaide Oval. That was a game where Dawson went 150, so not really many other points to go around for the Crows mids in that one. 99, 86, and 115. So some big scores here. And I just think that MJ said it on the Coach Panel 50 most relevant when he's chatting to Mitch from the Ball Boys about this. He couldn't see Rankine going under 30%. I can't see it either. I think Rankine's going to be there at least 30%. And I think it's more likely going to be 40 to 50% CBAs. I think the CBAs will be a little bit higher. I think he'll be able to push forward. I think Neil Bullen, for me, is what could unlock Izak Rankine, the player, and Izak Rankine, the fantasy player. I feel like Rankine will start a lot of the CBAs, and then Neil Bullen will be the one that will come up and push up the ground more, and Rankine will be able to get that mismatch in transition between going as the forward line, which could open up stoppage point when he's in the CBAs, but then open up those +6s on the spread, and then also getting those goals, having those mismatches in the 50. So I think the ceiling could be there for Rankine. I'm not saying a 100+ average or anything like that, but I feel like a 90 or so average could definitely be well and truly in his wheelhouse. Lemon, would you agree with that? Do you think that, and also what are your thoughts on Neil Bullen coming in? Do you think that is a thing that could unlock Rankine in potential his fantasy ceiling this season?
Rankine's a really interesting one, Bales, and I think that the really key talking point with Rankine is what do the Crows do structurally? So you've got Cumming coming in. I think he's going to be wing and defence. He probably won't impact Rankine too much. You've got Laird moving back. I think again that frees up some midfield time, but we're also seeing Peatling come in. He's probably going to soak up a bit of that midfield minutes. And then you've got Neil Bullen, as you said, coming in. We expect him to be a bit more forward, and I think he will probably play that high half forward role, maybe a bit deeper. So there's a few moving pieces with the Crows, and I think it's a really interesting one because Rankine, we know, is so effective forward of the ball. He's so dangerous. He's a great player around the stoppage, but he's also a really great target inside 50. And if the Crows' forward line is struggling, they might throw him a bit more forward in a game. If he kicks a few early goals, he could be the one that maybe they want to isolate him one out in the goal square. Maybe he floats up as that high half forward role as well. So I think he's a really interesting one. Obviously, he's still pretty young, coming into his 6th year. I think there's going to be some improvement there, and his tank's probably going to get a little bit better. Only sort of 84% time on ground last year. Sometimes with these guys who rest forward, that can be up into the sort of high 80s, which would be amazing for him. So yeah, I think it's definitely got it. Even if he just keeps doing what he did last year without those injuries, without those sort of maybe some of the poorer games at the start, he could easily be an 85, 90 guy. I guess the question for us is, can he go above 90? If he's a 95 averaging player, that is a smash pick. That's a really great pick, and that's really helping you finish really strong in the year.
Exactly. Yeah, and even looking at it here, like you're talking about the time on ground. Time on ground here in every game, like you've got like 94, 89, 85, 96, 92, 81, 84, 90, 92, 93. Then obviously after it was like eased back like 73, 82, 87, 76, and 49, obviously with the Port game. So, but when he's up and running, it's around that 90% mark, which is obviously very, very good. And as you mentioned, that guy that can push forward. But we did mention as well about Horne-Francis with that floor. Rankine's got that floor as well, right? He's not immune to the bad score as well. So had 3 weeks in a row where he went 72, 71, 71, had a 62 against the Bombers, had a 66 against North. I believe he got rested towards the end of the game, but he didn't come off in like the first 3 quarters as well. So there was that there. Then obviously the 74 against Brisbane, then the 45 against the Dogs, and then 47 obviously in just under half a game just over half a game against Port Adelaide. So he's got that floor, which isn't great, but obviously, as you mentioned, the increased CBAs. And the other thing is, I don't think he was training much in the preseason last year in the midfield, whereas this year, from all what we're hearing, is he's been training as a predominantly midfield. I don't see him playing like 60, 70% CBAs unless it's a lot of just CBAs and pushing straight forward. I see him very much as like a 50-50 split, probably at most. There'll be games where he has 60, 65, 70% when they want him in there a lot more, but there will be games where he'll only have like 20%. I still feel like there'll be games where his matchup will be a lot better forward and it will be better for the team. So that's the only negative I'll put towards Horne-Francis in the positive is that Horne-Francis, we know what his role is going to be. There'll be the odd stint forward every now and again. I don't see there being a game where he's going to only play 20% CBAs and spend the rest of the time forward. He's going to be at least 50%, I think, in every game, whereas Rankine could be a little bit fluctuating between week to week. And then the final point on Rankine before we just sort of chat about who we're going to be picking is that with Rankine, I saw against GWS and Sydney in those two games where the tag would start on Jordan Dawson from Jimmy Jordan in the Sydney game and then Toby Bedford. But then after halftime, they switched over to Izak Rankine. So I remember the GWS game. That was his season high score last year of a 115. That tag moved over him at halftime. Granted, didn't do much because he still scored 115 points, but the tag did move over there. And then the game against Sydney as well, scored the 86, but I believe he was started really well in that game, and then the tag moved over to him. So that is my concern this year, is that I think that Rankine is going to be the number one tag target this year. I know Dawson and how good he is, but I feel like Rankine is the more damaging player, that forward of centre guy that can kick the goals. Dawson is also very, very dangerous. So that's a bit like Port Adelaide. Who are you going to tag at the Crows? Is going to be Dawson, going to be Rankine. I feel like it's going to be Rankine because I think he's the most damaging player at the Crows. Lem, would you agree with that? Do you think that the tags could start going a little bit more to Rankine instead of Dawson?
Yeah, I think that's a big concern. You know, Horne-Francis can sort of turn the ball over a little bit. He's not the best user by foot, and generally that's the guy that the teams want to target. Whereas Rankine, you know, is a very classy player, can really damage off his boot and can really break lines. And I think, you know, Jordan Dawson as well. He's the number one tag target, but he can be tricky to tag sometimes. He's a bigger player.
Yeah.
He can go back behind the ball. If someone's following him and they like that matchup, he has gone in front of the ball beforehand. You know, he's a tricky matchup for taggers and not a guy that everyone in the league has a player that can run with Jordan Dawson. Whereas I think Rankine's a different type of player, a bit smaller, a bit lighter, a bit quicker. So I think it's definitely a bit of a concern. If he starts going at 90 plus, that's sort of the territory where teams will maybe put a bit more attention into him. I think he's going to get attention anyway, and he's such a great player. You know, I've got no doubt that he's going to be able to beat some of those tags. But yeah, for sure, we might see like a Toby Bedford. That might be a week where he's sort of hanging off him, and you might see a really poor floor score, which is going to hurt. I guess the big difference between him and Horne-Francis though is the starting price. At Rankine's starting price, that 50, 60 might not hurt as much. At Horne-Francis, when you're starting a top of the line guy, that 50 or 60 really, really hurts. So
yeah, exactly. And then also I should have mentioned as well, Rankine, we mentioned about Horne-Francis got a good early run. Rankine also has a pretty good early run as well. So he's got St Kilda, Essendon, North Melbourne, Gold Coast and Geelong. So really good first five to start. Runs into Giants in round 6. So I think that Bedford tag will be there. I think Bedford's are actually a really good matchup for Rankine there. Then has got Fremantle, Carlton, Port. So not a great 3. Then he goes Collingwood, West Coast. So it's sort of a little bit up and down after the first 5. But obviously when you're picking these prems, so they can get off to a flying start. And if Rankine was to average 100, it's sort of that would mitigate maybe the lower score coming against Bedford in round 6 or even a few lower scores. But I felt Rankine's a good enough player anyway that even in any matchup, the Crows are up and running, which I expect them to improve. Whether they make finals or not is I'm not sure. But I think he'll improve as the Crows improve. And I think that's where maybe some of these scores can translate to hundreds and get some of these bigger scores. But the time has come, though, to decide who we're picking between the two. So, Lemon, mate, if you had to pick between Horne-Francis and Rankine, who are you picking?
Yeah, maybe this is my Port bias coming through, but at the moment I like Horne-Francis just a little bit more. I think with that early fixture, I think he's a little bit younger, and I can really see he's had a pretty good preseason. I think I can really see that fitness taking a step up, and him just covering the ground a bit better, a few more tackles, a few more marks, and not massive upside. I think there might be 10 points there, sort of max, but yeah, I do like him from a particularly early season this year.
Yeah, it's going to pain me to say this as well as a Crows fan, but I think I'm just siding with Horne-Francis at the moment as well. I know the 100K is a little bit more expensive, but in most cases, people have got that spare cash to spend. So I think that spending it on Horne-Francis is probably better because they both got good early runs, but Horne-Francis isn't the number one or number two he's a very, very good player, but I feel like Rankine is the guy that's more of the tag target on the Crows than what Horne-Francis is, I reckon. So, and we've seen Horne-Francis he's got these games where he can accumulate the ball, like we saw against Melbourne. Obviously, had that 140. He's got these games where he can accumulate. Whereas Rankine, if he's accumulating the ball, Pete, that if he's not being tagged already, that's when he is going to be tagged. Whereas if, as you said with Horne-Francis, if he's accumulating the ball, he might not be kicking it great. So teams might not necessarily go and tag him. Whereas I feel like Rankine could be that guy. So that's what just sways me there. But I feel like both will be top 6 forwards. I think that, or top 8 at least. I think they'll both be up and around the sort of top in the line. And I think we'll have both of them in our team at some point during the year. It's just obviously who you're going to be starting. So have you got either of them in your side, Lemon? If you got both, if you got none, where are you sitting?
At the moment, I have Horne-Francis. He's sort of coming in and out regularly for me, just depending on where the cash is needed. So he's currently sitting at F1. I think particularly after Philippou got injured, it's nice to have that guy sort of locked in at a high price. So what about you?
Yeah, I've currently got none. I've currently got my Crate F1, so going a little bit cheaper in the forward line. But Horne-Francis has been the guy that's come in a couple of times over the last couple of weeks since the Philippou news. So he's the guy I'm probably more keen on. But Rankine as well, he's still in the mix. Like he looked pretty good in the match sim last Friday. So that's I'll be watching him in the practice games. I'm hoping to get down to the match sim on Friday. Crows might be having one, so I might get down that and have a bit of a watch. If I can, be good to see that as well and see what he does in the practice games. Currently none, but definitely a lot can change. But we do only have just over 3 weeks. We have literally 3 weeks from tomorrow when this episode goes out until opening round starts. So we're not far away from premiership points being up for grabs for AFL teams. But that is the end of the episode. Let us know in the comments below who you guys be picking between Jason Horne-Francis and Izak Rankine. I'd be really keen to hear your guys' thoughts. So let me know in the comments. Well, Lemon, mate, thank you very much for jumping on with me today. Where can the people find you across the socials? And also, it's good to be able to say this after, where can people find the podcast and where can they sign up to the Patreon?
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. Always a good chat. You can find me on X at lemon_DT. And you can find the podcast at lemon_league. So you can sign up through the Patreon. The first episode has the GOAT Selby from Maria's Magic on it. So really excited. And there is also a team reveal there just quietly up on the Patreon as well. So you can find that, listen to that and see what my team was at one point in the preseason. So yeah, very excited. Can't wait to get into a few more episodes as well. It's going to be great.
Yeah, beautiful. No, guys, make sure you do sign up. Not only if you got the incentive with the team review and Selby, but go and support the great man. Obviously, putting out a lot of really, really good content, obviously, from a very successful coach. So make sure you guys do get involved in that and help support Lemon there at the Patreon. And you can find me at BAILSDT and you can find us at AFL Fantasy Fans on Twitter. And if you haven't already, make sure you smash a like on the video and subscribe to our YouTube. 4K is the next goal for our subscriber sort of numbers. So if you guys can subscribe and help us reach that goal, that'd be very much appreciated. In terms of the next episode, we don't have the next episode quite locked in yet, but we will be having one on Friday with another special guest chatting about 2 more relevant players going head-to-head. But until then, have a good couple of days, guys, and we'll catch you on Friday. So thanks, everyone. See ya.